Good evening, students. Welcome to yet another lecture of Advanced Green Manufacturing Systems. And as we are nearing the completion of this course, we are getting into a little bit more advanced topics. In the previous class, I have covered analysis of variance and how it can be used to compare multiple means and those kind of things. So today what we are going to do is we are going to get into one interesting topic called factorial designs or factorial experiments. And these experiments, these factorial experiments are very important for our course, specifically because of the fact that these experiments will be used in industry for us to do many of the experiments by which we design where we convert the normal factory into a green factory. So today's learning agenda is an introduction to the factorial design, the interaction between the factors, and we talk about the basic. This is the basic two-factor factorial design. Then how do we analyze the two-factor factorial design using various statistical tools, and what are the advantages of using a factorial? We will go through that. And this comes under the set 9, lecture set 9 of this course. And please remember that this course, as I said earlier, this material will be covered from a practitioner's viewpoint. So what we are going to do is we are not going to go into the derivations, equations and those kind of things, but more than that we will just look into what is the basic, how do we apply this concept and the aspects of it. So let's first get through the basics, the fundamentals that you need to understand to do this properly in a process to convert the green factory. So the main thing is we know that there are many experiments, okay. Many experiments involve the study of two or more factors. You might have remembered that in ANOVA we were looking at the single factor of ANOVA. So I was like, ANOVA we looked at single factor. Okay. So here we are the factorial, we are looking at two or more factors as the important aspect of this study, right. So there are many places where you want to study two or more factors. Okay. So why factorials? The factorial design or factorial designs, okay, they are the most efficient tool, for such studies. What are the type of studies? Two or more factors. Such studies is the two or more factors. The reason why we use factorial designs is because they are the most efficient tool, okay, compared to any other tool that's available. To conduct study two or more factors, the factorial designs are the most efficient tool to do that. So what do you mean by factorial design? Okay, how do we define factorial design? Okay, the factorial design is that, in a way, simple way to say it is that in each complete trial, remember, or trial is also called as a replication. Remember, we were studying this term, trial and replication, they are being one and the same. So in each complete trial or replication of the experiment, okay, every time you conduct an experiment, every time you conduct a complete trial of the experiment or a replication of the experiment, all possible combinations of the levels of factors are investigated. Okay. So, what we are doing here is whenever we do one complete trial or replication of the experiment, we do study all possible combinations of levels of factors are investigated. So, for example, let us say you take the cutting speed of machine as let us say 45, 70, 125, 300 or something like this in RPM. Okay. So, then this is one factor, and then you can think about different materials or other factor. So, these are the different levels of the factor. Okay. So, this is the different levels or values at which the cutting speed of the factor is used. So, when we say levels, this is what we talk about. Okay. So, then the one way to think about is this example is that if there are A levels of factor A, if there are A levels of factor A and B levels of factor B, then each replication or what we call as each trial, okay, each replication or trial contains all AB combinations. Okay. So, this is what actually the factorial is about. If you have A levels of a factor and B levels of another factor, then each replication will have all the AB combinations of the system or the factors to study, right. So, like for example, if the cutting speed is a factor, let us say we call it as factor A, okay, and let us call it as materials as factor B. Okay. As we see, cutting speed has levels of 45 RPM, 70 RPM, 125 RPM and 300 RPM. Okay. So, these are the 4 levels. So, A is equal to 4, okay, and let us say we call materials as iron, okay, and let us say aluminum and steel, okay, let us say 3 things. So, then the factor of the level of factor is B is equal to 3. So, then what we are saying is the experiment, each trial will have AB which is 12. Okay. So, this AB is 12 in our case. So, we will have all the possible 12 combinations we will be able to test in these factors. Okay. So, such arrangement of factors in a factorial design, okay, this is often called as crossed. Okay. So, this is something similar to, remember, experimental design has it is like the P experiment of Mendel. Okay. Gregor Mendel, who studied the genetics, and so crossing is an example, and he did lot of trials about the red, white pea and red pea. You might have studied all those things. So, the crossing, so because design of experiments has its origin from agriculture. So, this is one of the reasons. If you say that I am using a factorial design that is crossed, what is we are causing about is that all the options of A and B, all possible combinations of A and B are being tried in this regard. So, that is what when somebody mentions the term crossing implies. Okay. Now, let us get into the second part or second concept called as the effect of a factor. Okay. And this term effect of the factor is, okay, it is commonly used, and you will say that I am doing this experiment, this factorial experiment to study the effect of a factor. So, what do you mean by effect of a factor? The question here is, what do we mean by it? Okay. What do we mean by it? Okay. So, the answer to that problem is this is defined as, the effect of a factor is defined as the change in y or change in response. Okay. When somebody says response, what we are talking about is y, change in y produced by a change in the level of the factor, the level of the factor. So, what we are saying is that when we bring a change in the level of the factor, when something in the factor level is changed, how does that reflects in the output or the y as the response variable? How does the response variable gets changed because of the change in the factor level is what we call as the effect of a factor. Okay. Commonly known as main effect. We normally call this as the main effect. Why do we call it as a main effect? Because it refers to the primary factors. It refers to the primary factors of interest in the experiment. Okay. So, the main effect, we normally call it as main effect because the primary factors of interest in the experiment are being studied. So, this cutting speed, this is a primary factor. Materials, this is another primary factor. Okay. So, same way we call this is the main effect or the change in the level of the factor. How does it create a change in the response of the y or the response variable is what we study, and that kind of a study is commonly called as a main or is called as the main effect. Now, let us consider an example. Let us take an illustrative example for this case. Okay. So, the consider a simple two factor experiment. Simple two factor experiment. Factor experiment with each factors having two levels. Okay. So, normally these levels are called as high. Okay. It is denoted by a plus sign, positive sign, and low denoted by a minus sign or a negative sign. Okay. So, in a one way to reply the or depict this is, you can put it in a graph. You have something called as a factor A, and the other axis you have something called as factor B. Okay. And we have something called as a, this is the minus sign. Okay, my bad, not minus 1, minus the low of factor A, and this is the plus, the high of factor A. Here is the low of factor B, and here is the high of factor B. So, then this particular point, this intersection point is the low of factor A at the low of factor B. This point is the low of factor A and the high of factor B. So, you can think about it as a line here. Similarly, this point is the high of factor A and low of factor B. You can think about it this way, and this point here is the high of factor A and high of factor B. Okay. So, then we can think about it as a scenario where this basically says the response of, okay, this image shows the response of how the change in y, the value of y will change with the value of x. So, I am just using some numerical numbers here. Let us say the value of y here is 20, and let us say the value of y here is 30, then the value of this here is 40, and the value here is 52. Let us say we do this for example, right. So, then let us consider factor A. Let us consider factor A. Okay. So, for this particular case we are considering the specific factor called factor A, okay, right. So, the main effect is the difference between average response of low level A and average response of high level A. Okay. So, what is the low level A? Okay. So, the low level A, the average this difference between the average response of low level A and the average response of high level A. So, what is the average response of low level A? So, the high level A has two values 40 and 52. The low level A has two values 20 and 30. Okay. So, the average of high level, okay, average of A high level is equal to 52 plus 40 divided by 2, because there are two values, the average will be this, right, and then the average of low level A minus will be, it will be 30 plus 20 divided by 2, right. So, if you think about it, what we are actually doing is, we are saying this is the average is between here, somewhere here, right, and here is the other average as part of this. Okay. So, you are finding the difference between both of these averages. Okay. So, if you do this, then what we do is, then we get A plus minus A minus will be, we will give you, get this will be 20 plus 30 by 2 is 50 by 2 is 25, then 52 by 40 divided by 2, that will be 92 by 2, and if you do that, then it will give you, this is 25, so that will give you 21, right. So, 21 will be the answer for this particular case. Okay. So, what we can actually think about doing it is, similarly if we do for B, okay, for B, the low levels of B. Now, let us take factor B. For B, the low levels will be, the low level is 20 and 40 and the high level is 30 and 52. So, for B it will be the high minus the low, which will be equal to, it is high is 30 and 52, that will be 52 plus 30 divided by 2 minus then the difference. So, it will be 40 plus 20 by 2, okay, which will give you something called 11. So, the average of the B is, so this is the average A and the average of the B is between these values. Okay. This is the average of B, right. So, what if you want to think about it in another way to represent these diagrams or these response factor is, you can think about it as a scenario where you have values, okay, or the low and the high, okay, this is A, this is the low and the high, this is B, okay, right. So, the at the lower value of A, this is how in the case of A it will work. Okay. This is for the low value of B and low value of B, and similarly for the high value of B it will behave something like this, B plus and B plus. Okay. So, this is what we can call it as the instead of this, let us do this way in a different fashion. Let us put numerical values here, okay, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, stuff like this, right. So, then in this case what actually happens is, for A, particular A, the lower values of A for two different levels of B is like this, and for same way for the high levels of B, this is how the values of A actually changes, right. This is another way of thinking about the response, or how does the change in response actually happens for A or two different levels of B. Okay. Hopefully, this actually makes sense to you guys. So, this is what we can call it as, in a way, main effect of A, okay, for two different levels of the other factor, assuming that the other levels or other factor is staying constant. All right. So, then there is one more effect that we need to talk about, which is known as the interaction effect. Okay. And the interaction effect is another important term. It usually happens along with the main effect. So, the interaction effect is also called as, so sometimes there will be difference, there will be a major difference, there will be major difference in the response between levels of one factor at all levels of other factor. So, what will happen is, when the response between one levels, okay, between the levels is levels implies low and high, okay. Between the low and high levels, or can be multiple levels also, more than that, between the levels of one factor at all levels of other factor, there will be a major difference. Okay. This major difference, this is known as interaction effect between factors. Okay. So, what we call this as the interaction effect, this major difference in the responses between levels of one factor is what we call as the interaction effect. So, let us consider the same case, okay, or let us consider another case. Example, consider the case presented in the graph, presented as a graph. Okay. So, we have two factors again. Okay. Okay. So, here is factor A and here is factor B. Here is the low of factor A, here is the high of factor A, here is the low of factor B, here is the high of factor B. Okay. So, now what we have is, same way we have a rectangle in this regard, you know that part, right. So, these points are connected that way, right, and then these points are connected this fashion, and that is pretty much it. And so, let us say at the low and low it is 20, and here it is let us call it as 40, and here is 50, and this is 12. Okay. So, in this particular case, what happens is, at low levels of factor B, okay, the effect of A is, it is given by what, at the lower level of B, this is the lower level of B, it is given by 50 minus 20, which is equal to 30, right. Then at high level of factor B, which is this one, high level of factor B, the effect of A is, what is effect of A? The high level is 12 and 40. So, it is 12 minus 40, which is equal to minus 28, negative 28. Okay. So, then what happens here is, because the effect of A depends on the level of B, because in the previous case it was the same, it was still was of the same sign, but whereas in this case what actually happened is it is a considerable, it actually changes the direction in this regard. Okay. Because because the effect on A, effect of A depends on the level of B, then with a magnitude of, what will be the magnitude? It will be the difference, magnitude of AB. This is the AB, it will be minus 28, the difference of this, okay, minus 30 divided by 2, which will be minus 29, right. So, 30 plus 28, 58 by 2, it will be minus 29. So, the AB effect in this regard, what we call it as, is because the way this actually happens. So, if we represent this, this is factor A, okay, it has a low value here and a high value here, okay. We represent these levels here, okay, and then we have, let us say 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 like this on this side, right. This is the Y, or what we call as a response. So, then for the low levels of A, okay, for the low levels of B, okay, this is at 20 ideally, right. And for the at B at low, the high levels, it will be at 50, okay. So, this is 50, okay. So, this is low B, low B, this is how it is behaving. Now, for the high value of B, the first one is at where is it, high values of B, the first one is at 40. So, this is B plus, this is this particular value, and the second one is 12, right. So, it is somewhere here. So, then this is also for the high values of B. So, this effect is what we call as the AB interaction. The previous case, you can see that no interaction. Okay. Here you can see there is an interaction happening because it is behaving in the opposite direction, right. So, the choice of level of B, okay, high or low, determines the value of response for A. Okay. So, the value of response of A to some extent is dependent on the value of the level of B. So, if the B is at a low level, A is showing a growing increase. If the B is at high level, then A shows a reducing behavior. Okay. I hope this kind of makes sense to you guys. Okay. Now, with this, what we will do is we will move towards the how do we represent, okay, the mathematically, how do we mathematically represent an interaction, or how does an interaction actually gets represented, right. So, the most important thing is, let us assume that both factors A and B, okay, are quantitative. Okay. Some examples, okay, it can be temperature, pressure, humidity, time, etc. So, both the factors A and B, okay, both are quantitative factors. Then we can say that then a regression model can be used for the two-factor experiment, because you know that for quantitative values we can use a regression. So, we can think about using it as a regression model. So, the regression model can be written as y is equal to, y is your response, okay, the output variable, y is equal to, can say beta 0, okay, that is your constant, plus beta 1 x 1 plus beta 2 x 2 plus beta 1 2 x 1 x 2 plus error. Okay. So, you can think about x 1 as factor A, x 2 as factor B, and x 1 x 2 as the A B interaction. Okay. So, y is the response variable. Okay. Betas are to be estimated from the data. Okay. These are the coefficients, all right, and variables x 1 variable that represents factor A, x 2 variable that represents factor B, then epsilon is the error term. Okay. So, what we do is we calculate the beta 0, this is the mean of means. Okay. Then from there, what is the change in value due to the value, what is the change in the mean value due to the presence of x 1, then x 2, then the interaction effect. So, this is one way of mathematically modeling the interaction in this level. Okay. Fine. Okay. So, let us continue this and let us stop the theory now here and try to do work an example and understand the problem using an example. So, here is a simple example, and this example is somewhat related to the green manufacturing system. So, consider a factory. Okay. There is a factory available that is designing an experiment to identify the time taken for material removal, how long it takes to remove the material to make a part. So, the factory is making a part and it is trying to identify the time taken to remove the material. The manager has to select the material. So, you select the appropriate material, and there are 3 possible choices. So, materials, there are 3 of them are available, 3 possible choices. Also, there are 3 possible speeds. Okay. There are 3 possible speeds on which the machine can be operated, right. So, data on the machining time is as follows. So, the machining speeds are available right here and the material type are available right here. So, let us call this as factor A and let us call this as factor B, right. So, the factor A has 3 things, which is the material type 1, 2 and 3. There are 3 type of materials, and material speed is you can think about as 45, 70 and 125, right. So, there are the 3 levels of the RPM that it is there, and these values in between here, these things, okay, these values, they are the observations. These are your y values observed. Okay. What that is your response, the machining time. Okay. It can be the machining time, let us assume that this machining time is in seconds or minutes or something like that, does not matter. So, these are the numerical values that we got for the particular problem. Hope this example actually makes sense to you. How do we solve this problem, or how do we approach at solving this problem? And the solution approach to these problems of is important because this result, this influences your analysis or the result. So, the experiment consists of, what is the experiment here? The experiment is a plant manager testing, is the plant manager, he is testing, the experiment consists of the plant manager testing all 3 material types, all 3 material types, all 3 material types against all 3 machine speeds. Okay. So, in this particular case, what we are trying to do is all 3 material types are being tested by against all 3 machine speeds. Okay. So, for each combination there are 4 samples. Okay. So, how do we get that? This is, you can see that this is the combination of these 4 samples, okay. Combination of material 1 with 45 RPM, okay, RPM of the machine speed. Okay. Similarly, for each case you can see that if you take this case, you can see these 4 things is the time for material 3 with 125 RPM. Okay. So, that is what we are talking about. For each case there are 4 samples. Okay. Then, so how many samples are there? So, this is 4, this 4, this 4. Okay. If you think about it, we will have how many samples will be there? So, there will be 36 samples. Okay, and all of them are tested in random order. All of them are tested in random order. Okay, that is what we are doing in this case. Okay. So, the other question is, what is the manager interested in? Manager interested in finding. What is the manager interested in finding out? This is the big question. Why would the manager do an experiment like this? Okay. So, one thing that the manager might be interested in finding out is what effects do material type and machine speed. Okay. What effects do material type, which is your factor A. So, material type is your factor A and machine speed, okay, factor B. So, material type and machine speed together, okay, have on machining time. Okay. That is one question the manager is interested in finding out. What effect do the material type and machine speed will have on the machining time? This machining time is your response, right. Second part is he might be also interested in finding out that is there a choice of material, that could give uniformly short machining time regardless of machine speed. So, what is he interested in doing here? He is trying to find out, is there a material that will uniformly give us short machining time regardless of machining speed. Why? Because lower machining time equal to lower energy consumption or equivalent to lower energy consumption. So, he might be interested in reducing the energy consumption. So, he want a lower machining time. So, he is trying to find out which material might give him uniformly short machining time regardless of whatever be the machining speed. Okay. So, the question number 2 that the manager want to ask, okay, suggest that a material that is not influenced by machining speed, okay, will make the process robust. Robust means whatever be the speed of the machine, it does not matter because it will not influence the time taken to produce it. Okay. So, this is also what we studied earlier is that robust process design. So, the manager wants to choose a robust material, so that the machine speed is not affecting the machining time. Okay. It's a hypothetical case. Okay. Also, this design, okay, this particular design, okay, this design is known as completely randomized design. Completely randomized design. Okay, because all the 36 observations are totally randomized and the data is collected according to the random setting of each material and the machining speed. So, what are the hypothesis we are trying to test here and what is the effects model that we are looking into. Okay. So, in there are two factors here. In two factorial experiments, both factors, also known as treatments in another term that is used, both factors, okay, are of equal interest. Okay. So, we have equal interest on both the factors typically. Three models are commonly used. People use three models. Number one, the effects model. Number two is the means model. And number three, the regression model. Okay. All three models are used. Okay. For this course, we focus on the effects model, Okay. So, what is the effects model, right? How do we write the effects model? The effects model can be written as Yijk, okay. Y is what is called as our response variable, is equal to mu, okay, plus tau I plus beta j plus tau beta I j plus epsilon I j k, okay, where I j k, where I varies from 1 to all the way to A. There are A levels of factor A. J varies from 1 to all the levels of B, which is for factor B, and K varies from 1 to all the way to little n. Little n will be the number of replications or number of observations. Okay. So, how many observations are there? That is why. Okay. So, rows are indexed by I, columns are indexed by j. Okay. So, if we go back in the previous example, these are your I, here is your j, and these ones, okay, each individual observations, here is your n, little n. Okay. So, this model, this particular model, okay, this is the effects model, we call it as the effects model. The reason is that the machining time, this is the machining time. Machining time is a function of a linear combination or a combination of mu, the average, plus the tau I. Tau I is average, another value, that is for because of the factor A, because I is for factor A, and beta j, j is for the factor B, which is your machining speed, and tau beta, this is your interaction, the interaction of both the factors, factor A and factor B, I j together, and then some error. Okay. All right. So, now let us talk about the what are the hypothesis. Okay. So, second part of this, because we just already talked about what is the effects model. Okay. So, what are the hypothesis we test? Okay. Three major set of hypotheses, major sets of hypotheses. okay, hypotheses. Okay. So, the first hypothesis, first row treatment effects hypothesis. Okay. So, first what we do is we do the row treatment effects hypothesis, where we are saying is that H 0, the null hypothesis is that tau 1 equal to tau 2 is equal to not t, tau 2 is equal to all the way to tau A is equal to 0. That means no effect due to treatments or levels of factor A, right. And the alternate hypothesis H 1 says that at least one tau I is not equal to 0. Okay. So, you basically saying that there is the one of them is different, significantly different than the other. Okay. Second, column treatment effects hypothesis. What we do next is we do the column treatment effects hypothesis, where that null hypothesis will be H 0 is equal to beta 1 which is equal to beta 2 which is equal to all the way up to, okay, which is equal to beta b little b is equal to 0. Okay. So, where we are saying that no effect due to the treatments of factor B, and alternate hypothesis is equal to at least one beta j is not equal to 0, where we are saying this that one of the beta j is significantly different from all other betas. Okay. Third, we test whether the column and row treatments or what we call as levels and treatments levels interact. Okay. On the top of the main effects, we also test the interaction effects. So, where we are saying is that H 0, the null hypothesis is that tau beta I j, okay, is equal to 0 for all I comma j. So, for all I and j, the tau beta I j is equal to 0. That is what we do one. Then the alternate hypothesis here is that at least one tau beta I j is not equal to 0. So, we are saying that at least one of the interaction effects is significantly different. So, which means at least one interaction effect is significantly different okay, than the other ones. Okay. So, this is the main aspects of the hypothesis testing in this regard, and the next part of this question is this problem is all about how do we analyze this whole thing in statistically. So, if we go back to this example, what we were actually trying to do is we were trying to first find what is the effect of these three on whether any one of these material has a significantly different performance compared to the other two. And then the other one that we were trying to do is any one of these, okay, these situations, these speeds will have a significantly different performance or significantly different behavior on the reduction of the machining time. That is what we are actually trying to find out in this regard. And then third part is that is any of these interactions, okay, do they actually do influence, okay, is any of these interactions is this is the. So, this is for the factor A, this is for factor B, this is for the interaction. Okay. We have these three hypotheses that we would be interested in actually studying and modeling on with this. Okay. And in the next class, what we will actually do is, we will actually do the statistical analysis. How do we analyze this model? Okay. What is the, how do we set this up? How do we do the numerical calculations? And once we get the numbers, how do we study or how do we make sense out of those numbers? And what can we conclude out of those numbers? That will be the next lecture out of this course. And thank you for your patient listening. And in the next class, we will work on how this statistical analysis of this model is being done. Thank you very much.